Appreciate Brother Fred filling in last week while we were in Destin, Florida. We had a good time. The Lord gave us a safe trip, but it's good to be back home as well. So appreciate Fred taking care of class last week. We're going to pick up this morning in Genesis chapter 13. There we go. We're going to go to Hebrews 2, but Genesis 13. I think last week you spoke about Abraham and maybe his call. And now we move on to Abraham and Lot this morning, or Abram and Lot. You know, this chapter 13 and 14, Lindsay was asking me if I was going to get somebody to teach this morning since we got back so late last night, but I really wanted to teach this because this is a couple, I think I say this a lot, but these are very exciting chapters in the Bible. They're real interesting. You could probably close your eyes and just point your finger and take off on any one subject that we're going to cover this morning, but they're just wonderful. There's a lot of really good truths in here, and we're going to cover a lot of them this morning, cover the highlights, and then you can go back and dig into them further. But Genesis 13, so here I guess last week we was introduced to Abram, or Abraham as we know him, and now Abram has went up out of Egypt. So last week he had went down into Egypt and with Sarah, his wife. Now they've come back up, and him and his wife, and we see here in verse number 1 of chapter 13, and Abram went up out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot went with him into the south. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. So he had money, he had silver and gold, he had cattle, he had livestock, and the Bible says here that he was very, very rich. And he went on his journeys from the south even to Bethel, and to the place where his tent had been at the beginning between Bethel and Hai. So here, if you remember, I don't know how deep Fred went into it last week, but Abram was never told to go down to Egypt, but he went, and of course he lied about who his wife was. Sarah said that she was his sister. And if you remember, the Lord plagued Pharaoh because of what Abram had done. And in verse 18 of the previous chapter, even Pharaoh asked, said, "What is this that thou hast done to me?" So now that Abram's kind of messed up, went in a place that he shouldn't, he's come back, and now he's went back to Bethel, and there's been a lot of good preachers preach out of this, talking about going back to Bethel. You see it many times, and a lot of times the sad truth is if we don't pass the test the first time, God brings us back to where we started, and he makes us repeat the task again. He did that with Jonah. Remember when Jonah was told to go and preach to Nineveh, but he fled to Tarshish. The whale swallowed him up and spit him out, and what did God say? Arise and go to Nineveh. So he hadn't changed his mind. He got him back on the seashore and said, "Listen, I still hadn't changed my mind. I still want you to go to Nineveh and preach." Here, Abram went back to the beginning, back to Bethel, and God made him start over, and unto the place of the altar, which he had made there at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So again, there in verse 4, we see that many times if you don't pass the test the first time, God makes you do it over. So now there's an interesting story takes place here, and it's the story of Abraham and Lot. And many of y'all, I'm sure you've read it hundreds of times. So here's where it starts the interesting journey, if you will. So we go back to Bethel. Now we kind of open the curtains in our scene play here. And we're out in the fields, we're there in the pastures. And verse 5 says, "And Lot also, which went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents." Verse 6, "And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so they could not dwell together." So here we open up this scene, and I mean, we can just kind of imagine that maybe this beautiful valley or pasture field, and I mean, they've got so much stuff. There's so many people, there's so many folks with them. There's so much livestock that they just can't. I mean, it's just not working out, and you can see that. We see that in different people's lives. It's just, man, things aren't working out too good. And then something happens, verse 7. There was strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle, and the Canaanite and Perizzite dwelled in the land. And Abram said unto Lot, Let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. So basically, their two herdsmen had a dispute and had some strife, and it was so big that apparently they couldn't resolve their differences. And that's where this kind of gets interesting, is obviously their substance was so great. If it had been me, I'd jump to some conclusions, but we read in the Bible that their substance was so great that they couldn't dwell together. I'd have just fired the herdman and stayed with Abraham. But the Bible says that Abraham came to Lot and said, listen, I don't want this strife between us. It must have been so big that the herdsman couldn't work it out, or there was so much going on, they just saw that there just wasn't going to be any kind of end to it. So Abram just said, listen, you choose a path and I'll choose a path. And Abraham, it shows a lot of great truth about Abraham. It shows how humble he is here. I mean, here's a patriarch. His name will go down in history. I mean, you can mention Abraham's name as one of few characters in the Bible that anybody can tell you anything about. And he said, listen, Lot, you take the right, I'll take the left. You take the left, I'll take the right. That's not usually how we react to things, is it? We would come up with a plan. We maybe would split the goods, and we would say, well, here's what I'm going to do. Or he said, listen, you choose your way and I'll choose the other. I'm not going to put any pressure on you. Wherever you want to go, I'll go the opposite. And so that's a very interesting, that shows you how humble that Abraham is, if you will. So he said, listen, you choose. So Lot here in verse 10, so something interesting happens here, obviously, is, and Lot lifted up his eyes and beheld the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, even as the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as they comest out of Zoar. So basically, Lot looked up and saw this land that went down, that ran down to Sodom and Gomorrah, that it was well watered. And a matter of fact, the Bible even alludes to it here, that it was much like the garden of the Lord. It's much like the Garden of Eden. Boy, that'd be hard to pass up, wouldn't it? And just kind of like when I alluded to Jonah earlier, and we will again here, just like in Jonah. When Jonah fled from the Lord, and he fled to Tarshish, remember, the devil brought by a big boat. Said, man, here's a boat, and guess what? It's heading right the way you're heading. It's heading to Tarshish, so you should get on it. And here, it's kind of neat that Satan has put this in front of Lot's eyes and said, here, just go this way. And the one key thing that we don't ever want to miss there is, instead of Lot searching out where is the best place that I can raise my children, where's the best place I can raise my family, where's a good place for my wife, he lifted up his eyes and he saw a place good for cattle. And you don't ever want to miss that fact, because we're going to beat up on Lot a little bit, but it's the truth, is when he looked, instead of finding a good place for his family, a good place for his wife, a good place for his children, instead he chose a good place for his cattle. And he sought after maybe to have as much wealth as Abraham had, to say, boy, I can go down there and make a lot of money. Maybe it was a place that he just saw that, hey, I can go here and I can dwell and it can be good, and he just got his priorities out of line. Whatever it was, the reason that he went for the wrong reason, and it may not have been very intentional. It may have just been that, man, this is a good place for cattle, so that's going to be good enough for us. But instead, as we know, because we know the whole story, he probably should have realized that, hey, this is not going to be a good place for my family. Then Lot chose him all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other. Verse 12, Abram dwelled in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners before the Lord exceedingly. So, again, the Bible, just in case it thought, well, maybe you're going to beat up on Lot a little too bad in year 2022, the Bible goes ahead and commentates itself in verse 12 and 13, says, listen, Lot made a bad choice. You know, I often kind of wonder, I do wonder, I like to look at these stories a little different sometimes than some people, but, I kind of wonder if Lot, he had a choice there. He could have chose basically any path. Abraham didn't give him a clear direction, and I often wondered, I would have probably just fired the herdsman and thinned down my lot. You could have, if you think about Lot there, I wonder that sometimes and think, boy, Lot almost should have just said, you know what, I'll keep what I can have to sustain and make me a little living. I'll work with you, Abram. If you want to supplement my income a little bit, I'll help you farm. I'll give the herdsman, I'll fire my herdsman. I'll give him the flock that the land can't sustain, and I'm just going to stay here with you. And I kind of wonder that, sometimes, boy, what the outcome would have been. I mean, it saved him a lot of peril and trouble, but instead they separated themselves, and we know the story. Lot went towards Sodom. And the Lord said unto Abram after that Lot, verse 14 here, after Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look forward to the place where thou art northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest for thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Of course, obviously, you and I know we can't number the dust or the sand of the sea. So that's what God gave Abraham. He said, everywhere you look, I'm going to give you this, and make you as great as the dust is to the earth, or the sand later on as it is to the sea. Now, an interesting thing happens here, and I want to spend a little time with this morning, because this is one of those great stories in the Bible that's hidden, and I mention it a lot, so you've heard about it, but it's got a couple real good points to it. So, after Lot separated himself, and went down to Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a period of time that went by. We don't know. It wasn't probably very long. But, and just to paraphrase a little bit, because I think it's good kind of told in story form, so I'll give you the Matthew Lewis version this morning. But there was a time when these kings were all fighting. And obviously in those days you fought over things. If you wanted to take over land or a people group or whatever, this king of this city would rise up and it'd decide, hey, I'm going to go down there. Kind of, hey, we see that today, don't we? We look at that today over in Ukraine. But isn't that what Russia basically did? Said, hey, we want to come in there and we want to take over your land and we want to take it back, and we're just going to come back in there and we're going to fight you. And the world's kind of sitting back seeing what's going to happen. Well, same thing in Bible times. You've got 4 kings here has decided, hey, we're going to go down to Sodom and Gomorrah and to 3 other places, and we're going to whip them. We're going to take their stuff. We're going to take their people, and we're going to get bigger. That's kind of what we do. We've been battling, fighting. We've won a few battles, and we're going to go down and we're going to whip that crowd next. So these 4 kings get together, and then they go down. You see it in chapter 14 in verse 9. And they go down and they fight with the 5 other kings, which here are the 2, of one with Sodom and one with the king of Gomorrah. So where they decide to fight is verse 10. And the vale of Siddim was full of slime pits. So the area that they was going to fight in was full of slime pits. So as they came together and started to fight, in verse number 10 it says, "And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled and fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountains. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah," talking about those other kings, "and all their victuals, and went their way." And notice this, "And they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelled in Sodom, and his goods, and departed." Now we later know, because of another interaction that's going to take place in a minute, that they took his family. They took his family. They took the women, the children. But no doubt that somebody, kind of like we studied there in the book of Job, somebody escaped. Somehow word got back, kind of like it did to us. I mean, you know, that's kind of, it's amazing now we have television and radio and everything. I mean, we were sitting there watching when Russia dropped the first bomb on Ukraine. We can watch that in real time. But, you know, even in Bible times, they had pretty real-time messengers, and somebody came and told Abraham what had happened. And they said, "Listen, you might be interested in this. These kings all been fighting, and they've been fighting down in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they've come up, and Sodom and Gomorrah, the kings got stuck in the slime pit, and they've come and took over the cities and took out all the goods, and Lot's family," remember your nephew Lot, he's with them. And so when you see that, and we're going to come back to this point here in just a second, but obviously word got back to Abraham. And in verse 14 it says, "When Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan." So here's a man that just separated himself very humbly from Lot. We went over that. Said, "You choose right, I'll choose left. You choose left, I'll choose right." I mean, that's a pretty easy decision. Whatever you choose, I'll choose opposite. You know, it'd been pretty easy for him to say, you know, Lot went the wrong way. Lot went down to Sodom and to Gomorrah, and he's living amongst a bunch of wicked people. And right here's the first one of the lessons that you can pull from this, is that many times Christians, and us included, me included, we as Christians, we live sometimes in this bubble and think, boy, you know, if this happens, or somebody rises up against Christianity, or somebody says something contrary to God's word, or somebody does something, I think sometimes we think, well, we shouldn't fight, and we shouldn't stand up for a fallen Christian or a fallen brother. And I think here's a good lesson where Abraham was just a farmer, and he obviously had separated himself from Lot. Lot had went and dwelled amongst some wicked people, and he could have just easily said, "Listen, he's done gone the way of a sinner. He's messed up, and I'm not going to help him." And sometimes I think we live in our little bubble in here on Sunday morning and think, boy, we're doing right, and we don't really care about anybody else. But I think Abraham here proves different. He says, you know what? That's Lot. He's my brother. I'm going to go fight for him. I'm going to go get him. And, you know, he could have criticized him there, or said, well, he got what he deserved. Isn't that what we would say many times? Well, I guess he got what he deserved. He went down the wrong road, and now she's a drug addict, and she's lost her kids. I guess she's just dwelt the hand she's laying in the bed she made. Well, no, that's not the case sometimes. I mean, Abram could have said that, but he didn't. He said, you know what, that's my brother, I'm going to go get him. And here's one of the most fascinating battles in the history of the Bible, I think, I always call it Abraham's first SEAL Team 6 right here. I mean, this is them. And the tactics that I'm telling you, this is them. They can say that it was invented whenever it was invented, but I'm telling you right here's it. I mean, this man was a farmer, but they fought, no doubt, animals and things to keep their livestock safe. And he went down and he found 318 of his men that no doubt were godly men, no doubt had followed Abraham. They was born in his own house. I mean, you think about, this is shaping up to be something pretty historic. He saw them trained up, He's told them, hey, this is a dangerous mission. We may not make it back home. And they've stepped forward, and 318 said, it don't matter, we're going to go with you. If you're going to get Lot, we're going to go with you. And this is one of the greatest battles that's found in the Bible that people skip over a lot. So here's Abraham's SEAL Team 6. So verse 14, and when Abram heard his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants born in his house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Now watch this. Now here's just Farmer Abraham, but now I'm telling you, here's SEAL Team 6's leader. And he divided himself against them. So he went in and he decided, hey, listen, we can't just swarm them all together. We're going to have to divide them. We're going to flank them. We're going to hit them from all sides. And, I mean, now these are the kings. And this is what I think these are kings and countries that fight and are taking over other big cities. I mean, this is a pretty big deal. Now they're encamped. They've come off a great victory. They're probably planning their next one. And here's Abraham sneaking through wherever they're at. In the middle of the night, and he said, all right, you guys go over this way, you guys go over this way, and then we're going to bring on the attack. We're going to hit them all at one time. And listen at this. Our SEALs, they don't fight during broad daylight. They don't go out and fight during the day. They come in by night, don't they? Watch this. And he divided himself against them, he and his servants, by night, and smote them. So he even had enough intuition. He says, we're going to divide ourselves and we're going to hit them at night when they're least expecting it. When they're all asleep, we're going to go in and we're going to take them by surprise. And he did, and he smote them and pursued them to Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus. Now listen, I love this. This is we should make movies out of stuff like this. So he not only whipped them, these kings, he went and whipped them, and now he brought back all the goods and also brought again his brother Lot and his goods and the women also and the people. So I'm talking went in there and whipped them and took all, and just to put the icing on the cake, took all the stuff back with them and said, hey, this was somebody else's and you're not going to have it. And we not only whipped you, but now we're going to take it. And it goes on here in a minute. And it says when Abraham returned from the great slaughter. The Bible uses those words. I'm talking they whipped them. And they brought a great slaughter on these kings. And they took Lot, they took the women, the people, the goods, and they brought all this back. And so here, before I forget to say this, so, I always like this point because I grew up in Chai Baptist Church, and we hear this a lot in Baptist churches, so I always like this part of the story. I think this was Lot's opportunity. I think people miss that in the story. I think here was Lot's opportunity for God to open his eyes. And he brought him right back to Abraham. It wasn't the way he wanted. Abraham wouldn't have been a person of choice. He was a farmer. We didn't know about Abram's SEAL Team 6 till now. I don't even know if Lot knew about them. But now God's brought Lot back out of a terrible situation in Sodom and the people that are wicked and sinners before the Lord. And the Lord's brought Lot out of that. And who's he put him back with? Abraham. And I think so many times we miss that. And I don't mean this making fun, but I do making a point that I think so many times, like Lot, and me included, and I'll pick on myself, but if Lot was sitting in church that night with Abraham, I've heard this, and I really believe this would be true, that Lot is a lot like we are sometimes. Man, he'd stand up when the preacher wanted to say, has anybody got a word of testimony? And boy, he'd jump right up now that he's back with Abraham. He'd say, boy, I got a story to tell y'all. Man, I was down there dwelling with wicked sinners. I was down there. Well, he wouldn't say that, see. He would say, I was dwelling down there in Sodom and Gomorrah, and them evil kings come down there, and they took us captive, And they kept us captive for how many ever days or hours till Abraham showed up and man with his SEAL Team 6, and they whipped them. And the Lord has brought me right back to Sodom, and I just want to give a word of testimony tonight and thank my Lord for delivering me when he missed the whole point. We're so guilty of that. Lot said, man, the Lord's been good to me. Look what he's done for me. When I think the Lord delivered him, put him right back where he needed to be with Abraham, and instead Lot went right back down to Sodom and Gomorrah. I think the Lord brought him out of it. I really believe that. And instead, Lot totally missed that. It went right over his head. And he said, you know what, the Lord's been good to me, and then he run right back to the sin. And he went right back. Don't ever miss that part of that story. I think Lot should have made a choice there and had his second chance to say, you know what, I'll give these cattle to this herdsman and I'm going to sell them off and I'm just going to stay with you, Abraham. Apparently this is where I need to be. But I think the Lord tried to wake him up there. But anyway, so now we've been introduced to Abraham's SEAL Team 6, 318 men. They done whipped the kings. They brought back all the goods. They brought back Lot. They brought back the people. They brought back the women. And now, boy, something just out of the air, out of the blue. We've never heard about him before. I love when the Bible does this, and it does it a few times. It's just for no apparent reason whatsoever, out of the blue, here comes somebody called Melchizedek that we've never even heard of before. Melchizedek is introduced to us, and the Bible sometimes runs these rabbits that, I mean, just out of the blue. It's like, where in the world did this come from? And right here's one of them. And verse 17, and the king of Sodom went out to meet him after his return from the slaughter. And verse 18, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was the priest of the Most High God. So here we're hearing something about God that we honestly haven't ever heard before. And Melchizedek gives God a name that for the first time I think we hear it here is the Most High God. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be the Most High God, which hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand, and gave him tithes of all. And he gave him tithes of all. So talking about Abraham. So right out of the middle of nowhere comes Melchizedek. Now, we're going to look into him just a little bit. Now, this is one of those passages of scriptures that in the Bible that you got to be careful about what you say about Melchizedek, because the Bible tells us some limited information about him. And it's kind of like when Jesus wrote into the sand. You know, you can say all day what he wrote, but the Bible don't tell us what he wrote. So, you know, you can draw conclusions and we can talk about it and discuss it, but ultimately the Bible don't tell us. It's just like the author of the book of Hebrews. The Bible don't tell us who the author of the book of Hebrews is. You can say whose writings it's like or who it seems like must have wrote it, but it don't tell us. So you can't say with 100% certainty. So kind of like here, we don't know much about this character. Now, some people believe this is a Christophany, a pre-incarnate, rendering of Christ here in the Old Testament, as we've seen before. You saw that with the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when King Nebuchadnezzar looked in the fire. Remember, he's seen the form of the fourth, looks like the Son of God. There was a pre-Old Testament Christ walking around in the fire. So some people believe Melchizedek could be that. Some believe other things. So here's Melchizedek. So what do we know about him? So one, and we're going to look at some more about him. So one, he's a priest, which later on in Hebrews tells us that he's the king of righteousness. So if he's the priest here, he's the king of righteousness. Now, he's not only a priest, but now Melchizedek's an interesting character, because now he's a priest, which is the king of righteousness, is what his name means. But he also is the king of Salem, which means the king of peace. So it's kind of like Melchizedek has double rank, if you will. He's not only a king, but he's also a priest. And so he's got a little double rank. His priesthood here, and we're going to look at this here in a minute, is older than Aaron's. So, before Aaron was Melchizedek. Here's the most interesting thing about this character, is there's no genealogy. I mean, if you hadn't learned anything, that pretty much through Genesis, we talked about it after the flood, and we talk about it with Jesus Christ, with tracing him back through Mary, tracing him back through his father Joseph, through King David, through all those different things, but Melchizedek is never found in any genealogy. He's not there. I mean, this is the first time. I mean, this man appeared out of thin air. I mean, but here's something we know. Is Abraham, a patriarch that has his own SEAL team, very rich in silver and gold and cattle, he knew exactly who he was and immediately paid him tithes of all that he had just got. So Abraham knew. I mean, there was no doubt, or the Bible don't allude to any doubt. Like Abraham's like, who in the world is this character coming? I mean, out of the sky or out of thin air comes Melchizedek, and Abraham knew who he was and offered him tithes. Here's something else. Notice what he offers here in our text. Verse 18, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine. What do we know later on? What's bread and wine? What's that mean later on in the New Testament? The body and the blood. This do in remembrance of me. No doubt, whatever you believe about Melchizedek, no doubt he's a type of Christ, without a doubt. And here's this character that he gave him tithes of all. So now we're seeing, so let's look at, so then as soon as that happens, now it's over and it's gone and we're going to go on with our story. So see, it's so strange. It's just out of the middle of nowhere. Here comes Melchizedek, and as fast as he was here, he's gone, and now Abraham's talking with the king of Sodom. So let's look into Melchizedek just a little bit more before we leave. So he's mentioned another time in Psalm 110, verse 4. It says, the Lord has sworn and will not repent. Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So he's mentioned in Psalms 110, verse 4. But then, again, here's the other interesting place that he's mentioned. So in the book of Hebrews, as we always defer as the great hall of faith, there's something else that goes on in the book of Hebrews. One of them that I've taught about many times is all the better thans, that Christ is the better messenger, he's better than angels, he's better than Abraham, he's better than Isaac, he's better than Aaron, he's better than everything. I mean, all the way through Hebrews it shows you that Christ is better than. But then the main portion of Hebrews shows you about the priesthood and of the types and the things that the foreshadows. It says, that once they used the blood of bulls and goats, but now Jesus is the better sacrifice. They went in a tabernacle made with hands. Jesus went in the one not made with hands, to the very throne of God. So it makes all these different, and you've read Hebrews, so you understand as it goes through here. And as you're going through this priesthood in Hebrews, and it's talking about these better things, and about the blood of bulls and the blood of goats and so on and so forth, all of a sudden, and it's mentioned just once or twice before, but then all of a sudden it's like in chapter 7, somebody remembered over in chapter number 5, hey, you mentioned this character named Melchizedek. We want to hear more about him. So let's just look at this real quick. I think we got a little bit of time. So in chapter 5 of Hebrews, it talks about our great high priest, the office of a high priest, Christ the high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So let's look at Hebrews 5 verse 5. So also Christ glorified not himself to be made an high priest, but he that said unto him, Thou art my son, today have I begotten thee. As he saith also to another place, Thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. I just read that to you in Psalm 110 verse 4. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared, though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect, he became the author of eternal salvation unto all them that obey him, called of God and high priest after the order of Melchizedek. So, as we know, you got the kings and things came out of the tribe of Judah, but then the priest came out of the tribe of Levi. So, you know, it's almost like, and I enjoy when the Bible does this, it's like the Bible, and I'm trying to explain this correctly to you, it's like, sometimes it's like the Bible's writing to a group of people, and it's almost like somebody stops and says, well, wait a minute, tell us more about this, or all of a sudden the Bible will run a rabbit and it will say, well, let me tell you more about this character I just mentioned. Well, that happens in Hebrews 7 again when it comes to Melchizedek. So, in chapter 6, verse 20, right before 7, it says, whether the forerunner is for us entered, even Jesus, made an high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. It's almost like somebody saying, listen, you've mentioned this character 3 times. He appeared out of the sky when Abraham returned from the slaughter, and then he went away, and we don't know nothing about him. Tell us something about him. So here we go, chapter 7. For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him, to whom also Abraham gave a 10th part of all, first being, by interpretation, king of righteousness. So he said, listen, and here's what you got to understand about the Bible. It's saying, listen, guys, this patriarch, Abraham, knew who this man was. I mean, this ain't just some fly-by-night Joe that you only know who his name is in the Bible. This is Abraham. And he knew who Melchizedek was, and he gave him a 10th part of all. First being an interpretation of king of righteousness, and after that also king of Salem, which is the king of peace. So he's got dual power. He's a priest and he's a king. Without father. So here it says, well, wait a minute. Yeah, but you remember he just dropped out of thin air. He ain't got no genealogy. We don't know nothing about this cat. He says, well, it's because he's without father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like unto the Son of God, abideth a priest continually. So there would stand you a good reason to think that could be a Christophany, that it could mean something that we don't know. I mean, he don't have a father, he don't have a mother, he's without descent, he's having neither beginning of days nor end of life. He's made like unto the Son of God. That's the biggest Son of God. That's Jesus. Abideth the priest continually. Now consider how great this man was. So this is where it takes you back to a man even. He says, now consider how great this man was, unto whom even the patriarch Abraham gave the 10th of the spoils. And verily they that are of the sons of Levi, who receive the office of the priesthood, have a commandment to take tithes of the people according to the law, that is, of their brethren, though they come out of the loins of Abraham. So he says, listen, I mean, y'all thought that the tribe of Levi come up with this when we established the priesthood, but it says, listen, this thing's always been, Abraham paid tithes to Melchizedek. He said, they didn't invent that. They didn't reinvent the wheel here. It says, but he whose descent is not counted from them received tithes of Abraham, and blessed him that had the promises. And without all contradiction, the less is blessed of the better. And here, so I want you to notice this. Watch this. Verse 8. And here, men that die receive tithes. But there he receiveth them of whom it is witnessed that he liveth. So it's saying, listen, here you got men that are just men, that are Levites, that are the priests, they receive tithes. And guess what? When one of them dies, he gets replaced with another. And then another one dies, and then he gets replaced with another as well. Y'all give that bunch tithes. Well, here is one that the Bible that I just told you don't even have an ending, that liveth forever, Melchizedek. And guess what? Abraham, y'all's patriarch, he gave him tithes too. And as I may so say, Levi also, who receiveth tithes, paid tithes in Abraham. For he was yet in the loins of his father when Melchizedek met him. So we go on and let's look down in verse 21 for time's sake. It says, for those priests were made without an oath, but this with an oath by him that said unto him, the Lord sware and will not repent, thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. So what's it saying is, again, even Jesus better than Moses, Jesus better than Aaron, but Jesus is also better than Melchizedek, because now he says Melchizedek come on the scene. That's who Jesus is a priest forever after, is the order of Melchizedek. It goes way past Aaron and the Levites and all that crowd. And now Jesus is still the one that went in one time and offered the one-time sacrifice. So again, it ties all that together, if you will. And it's still, and I know we hadn't covered it as good as we could have. But that's an interesting character there, old Melchizedek. So after that, let's just finish real quick here. So let's go back and so Melchizedek's dropped out of thin air, if you will. Now he's left. And watch this. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, the professor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine,